I'm Dr. John Gartner.
And I'm Dr. Harry Segal.
And welcome to another session of Shrinking Trump.
Our show every week takes a look at Donald Trump and his cognitive decline. We've been noting this now for a month and a half, that Donald Trump has been suffering from the early symptoms of an emerging dementia. And while we've been talking about that and comparing his functioning to the normal aging of Joe Biden, we've also been thinking about Trump's personality. He is someone who has long suffered a narcissistic personality disorder, meaning that he is organized psychologically to ward off a sense of failure, of collapse, of dissolving into nothing if he isn't maintaining adoration and convincing himself of his own power. And we're always looking at both of these things and also at how they interact, because often when Trump starts to falter, he will justify it or rationalize it by referring to it as genius. So this is our weekly show. I'm so glad to be here. And I wanted to let you know that Dr. Gartner and I are both clinical psychologists. And our goal is really to educate the public, to help them to think clinically in a more sophisticated way. John?
All right. Well, we had a lot of activity this week in Trump. Harry, sometimes I used to say, what's it going to take for people to realize that Trump is impaired? If he was foaming at the mouth, would that do it? Well, apparently the answer is no. So he was foaming at the mouth. And what's interesting about this is actually a recorded advertisement that he put out. Okay. So, Chip, can we see the first footage?
We will take back our country on November 5th, 2024. On November 5th, 2024. 2024.
Now, I apologize to people who are listening. I should have set this up because you heard this repetition. For those who are watching, they kept panning the camera in closer and closer and slowing down the action, so you could really see the full lip covered with spittle. It's a large amount of spittle in the corner of his mouth.
Strange they didn't catch it when they kept it into that advertisement.
Well, he only hires the best people, so I'm sure he only hires the best video people. That, or maybe they thought that was the best he could do, or they're just used to it by now. In any case, I'm not going to make too big a deal out of this, but I just want to point out that Trump is losing control of his basic biological functions. It's not normal to be spitting when you're giving a speech, especially have a big bolus of spittle like that. Not to be too gross about it, but to just be graphic and descriptive. And remember, this is the guy who was falling asleep in court. And, that happens maybe once, rarely in a blue moon. He was falling asleep most days in court. He was involuntarily losing consciousness and apparently passing gas and maybe also wearing diapers. So I'm just trying to point out that we are seeing further evidence of the basic breakdown of his capacity to control his basic psychological functions.
I get that. Sure.
All right, moving on to Arizona. So Trump had a rally and a speech in the great state of Arizona. And let's hear how he introduced his speech to the great people of Arizona.
Here in Texas, and by the way, the governor of Texas has done a very good job.
He's in Arizona, but he thinks he's in Texas, and he thinks that the governor of Texas is doing a great job. Trump is frequently disoriented to the point where he does not know where he is. It's not the first time that he's mistakenly described his location. So when we talk about someone being disoriented, it's like disoriented to place, time, and person. So if you don't know where you are, that's really bad.
Well, and also we often quoted John Heilman, who says that whatever Trump says is confession or projection. And he's been lately, and I have to say, and our joke to our audience is we watch all this stuff so you don't have to, but I've been watching a lot of Trump. He's lately been saying that Joe Biden is dumb and can't put two sentences together.
Right.
And saying that he's actually not the evil mastermind that they've been saying he is, but there are people around him are controlling him.
Mm-hmm.
And again, let's think about how people must be trying to manage Trump. And for example, I mean, these rallies, again, they're not at night.
That's right. That's right.
It's continued. I keep waiting for a nighttime appearance. He's just hasn't been making them yet.
They're going to name you as ancillary advisory staff because ever since you started saying that, they stopped. Ever since you started pointing out that he's even more demented and sundowning at night, they stopped having him appear at night. So they may be watching this show. They're listening to us, Harry.
Well, they certainly are noticing that at night it's harder for him
they're noticing
to get himself together. That's for sure.
Yeah, they can see it with their own eyes. Actually, for the most part, he was pretty intact in Arizona. But there's one little thing that's actually quite important that's been under the radar that I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. So experts in frontotemporal dementia have pointed out to me that he shows a telltale sign of dementia that is very specific and very much a tell, which is it's called a wide-based gait. It's a peculiar way that he swings his right leg as if it's a dead weight in kind of a semicircle. It's it's really under the radar. It's not something you'd necessarily notice. So first, I'd like to show the person who first pointed this out. I want to give her credit, is Dr. Elizabeth Zoffman. In her article, in a interview she gave in Salon. Maybe we can just see that cover. Forensic psychiatrist on physical signs of Trump's mental decline. Quote, changes in movement and gait. Quote, his walk appears wide-based, Dr. Elizabeth Zoffman noted on Trump. He has developed a swing of his right leg. Okay, I'm going to show you some video. And for those of you who are listening, again, I apologize. But it's very short. It's 3-4-second videos. And I'm actually going to ask you to look at them both twice because you really have to pay attention to see that swinging leg. So, Chip, can we see the first one for the first time? Do you see that swinging leg? See how he's swinging it? Let's just see it one more time. There's a swing. There's a swing.
It's almost like he's shaking it.
Yeah. Okay, so that's one example. Chip, let's look at the second tape. And again, he's a little bit in the background, so I'm going to ask you to show it again. As he comes in the door, you see that kind of swing. He's standing. There was one more swing closer up. The reason I'm bringing this up is Ron Filipowski, who talk about people who watch all of Trump's speeches, so you don't have to. He does a lot of video of Trump on Twitter. He's been paying attention to this right leg issue. Here's some video from Trump's right leg in Arizona. Right? You see that swing as he's walking away from the podium? So the thing about this is so interesting, and this is why it's really interesting to talk to doctors who are specialists, which we're not, obviously, in this area, is these are the kind of things that a neurologist and a neuropsychiatrist would notice as sort of peculiar but red flag symptoms of dementia, that people don't have this kind of wide-based gait without some kind of meaningful brain damage and deterioration. So anyway, we're just going to keep an eye on Trump's right leg, okay, as things progress, because what I think is going to happen is that right leg is going to get wonkier and wonkier as his brain deteriorates more and more. So let's move on to Nevada. Okay, so this tape you may have heard before because all of the comedians were showing it. Trump's went off the teleprompter. He was trying to say something bad about electric-powered boats, but see if you can figure out what this rant is about.
Oh, and just to be clear, the teleprompter stopped working.
Okay.
And he makes comments about it, like he makes jokes about it, and then he starts to improvise.
It's an excellent point, Harry, because when the teleprompter stops, we see the real Trump. So,
and it must be because of MIT, my relationship to MIT, very smart. He goes, I say, what would happen if the boat sank from its weight and you're in the boat and you have this tremendously powerful battery and the battery's now underwater and there's a shark that's approximately 10 yards over there. By the way, a lot of shark attacks lately. Do you notice that? A lot of shark. I watched some guys justifying it today. Well, they weren't really that angry. They bit off the young lady's leg because of the fact that they were not hungry, but they misunderstood who she was. These people are crazy. He said there's no problem with sharks. They just didn't really understand a young woman swimming now who really got decimated, and other people too, a lot of shark attacks. So I said, so there's a shark 10 yards away from the boat, 10 yards, or here. Do I get electrocuted? If the boat is sinking, water goes over the battery, the boat is sinking. Do I stay on top of the boat and get electrocuted? Or do I jump over by the shark and not get electrocuted? Because I will tell you, he didn't know the answer. He said, you know, nobody's ever asked me that question. I said, I think it's a good question. I think there's a lot of electric current coming through that water. But you know what I'd do if there was a shark or you get electrocuted? I'll take electrocution every single time. I'm not getting near the shark. So we're going to end that. We're going to end it for boats. We're going to end it for trucks.
Okay. Yes. I want to make a quick comment. Do you all remember during COVID when during those daily briefings, he suggested, I remember Dr. Birx had that response. He says, you know, what if we opened up the body and shone light in there or put cleanser or whatever it was, bleach into the body? It's the same kind of story. He tells these aggrandizing stories.
Right.
Like, I've got this great idea. You notice he mentioned MIT at the beginning of that clip? I hope our audience remembers. So it was it the NRA or it was earlier than that? There was a speech recently where he was kind of disorganized. And then he talked about his racehorse theory and talked about how his uncle was a president at MIT. No, then he corrected himself, a professor at MIT. And there he was thinking of it, saying it, so he wasn't editing or self-regulating, didn't even explain it.
Yeah.
Because he went into a story about how brilliant he was and how no one else had ever asked the question about getting electrocuted from an electric battery.
You know, I have to give Trump credits for chutzpah, because remember that scene in Men in Black where with the black actor Will Smith says, you know what the difference is between you and me? I make this look good. You know, well, the thing is, Trump makes dementia look good. He's, you know, here he is spouting this insane theory, right? And of course, he says, and the guy said, no one's ever asked me that question. Well, damn right, no one's ever asked you that question because it's crazy, right? It's stupid. But instead, it's like, I'm from MIT. I mean, like, I'm a genius, you know? It's like, instead of actually having any sort of awareness that this is completely nuts, he's bragging about his MIT genius. And you know what? This is the funny thing. He gets away with it because on him, he makes it look good.
Well, John Talmadge, who we had on our last show, referred to this as the Sir stories.
Yes.
They always begin with someone saying, Sir, what would you do if we did that?
Right.
It's one of his he has these phrases and forms that he gums together without really thinking about them.
Well, these are his imaginary friends. There is no sir, you know. And so when they say sir, it's really him talking to himself, making up a story, kind of having a fantasy, right? Where someone is mirroring back to him what his fantasies are and his fantasied world. But there's this non-existent person like John Barron, you know, he used to make up when he wasn't demented, he used to make up these characters, right, who would validate what he was saying. Hi, this is John Barron. I want to tell you some great things about Donald Trump. You know? Well,
the key, and for Dr. Scrovan, our guest who's going to be coming up, the key is the stories are self-aggrandizing.
Yes.
I'm so brilliant. No one's ever thought of this question before. I'm so brilliant. No one's thought of opening up people's veins to cure COVID with bleach, right? They're self-aggrandizing stories, and that's part of the narcissistic personality organization.
And speaking about narcissism, remember last week when someone collapsed in the crowd and someone shouted, water, water. And Trump's response was to go, water? Sure. reaches down, takes a bottle of water, and starts drinking because, damn, it's hot. And it seemed like really just either the height of narcissism or actually he got cognitively derailed. That was the discussion. Well, here is sort of a sequel to the water story. Let's look at the next piece of tape.
We don't have enough time. We only have a few hours. We don't have enough time. And now, by the way, it's 110, but it doesn't feel it to me, right? So we'll stay out here for a little while. If anybody gets tired, you'll let me know. And if anybody goes down, if you start going down, we have people, they'll pick you up right away. They'll throw water. You know, they were so worried. Everybody was so worried yesterday about you. And they never mentioned me. I'm up here sweating like a dog. Secret Service said, we have to make sure everyone's safe. I said, what about me? We never thought of that. They don't think about me. I'm working my ass off. I'm working hard.
Yeah, but enough about all of the audience and whether they might be oppressed by the heat. What about me? Nobody thinks about me. I mean, so here the narcissism is, on display in a humorously absurd way.
And the crowd loves it. His crowd loves that.
Isn't that interesting?
It's very funny. It works.
Right, it worked. So there's a couple more pieces of tape that I want to play from Nevada that don't speak to his dementia and are not funny. They speak to his malignant narcissism, and the point that I'm about to make that Trump really is the American Hitler. I've been saying it for years, but now he's coming out of the closet, if he was ever in the closet, but he's saying it more overtly. And I just want to show two pieces of tape. One is where he's talking about how China, he wishes he had the power of summary execution like they have in China. Let's see this tape.
But if you went with the death penalty, you would have no drug problem in this country. Instant, if it was a meaningful, not a trial that lasts 400 years. Like China, I was with President Xi. I said, do you have a drug problem? No. He didn't even know what I was talking about. He's got 1.4 billion people. I said, do you have a drug problem? He goes, no drug problem. I said, how do you do that? Essentially, he said, the death penalty. We catch, they call it quick trial. They have a trial, and it's quick.
Now, Trump really does want to be a full dictator. He would like to be able to have the power of life and death over anyone he decides to execute. And if you think he's joking, we're about to go in after this next piece of tape over his plan for 2025, published in the New York Times, just so people understand that this is really of a piece, that they have a plan. It's written down. They're not joking. They are going to dismantle the Constitution if they can. But one of the pieces of his plan that I find most dangerous and offensive as a Jew is their attack on immigrants. They are demonizing them, they're dehumanizing them, and they're setting people up for the idea that we can send them to concentration camps. As I explained, a concentration camp is not the same as a death camp. It's a camp where you concentrate undesirable people. They're going to cart millions of them away in the streets and put them on buses and put them on trains and send them to camps or send them out of the country. I just want you to hear one more piece of rhetoric. I know I've played this type of thing for you before. One more piece of rhetoric about how he talks about immigrants.
It is crazy. The illegal immigrants are turning, and they're turning at a level that nobody's ever seen before. They're fighting our families. They're totally destroying our black population. They're totally destroying our Hispanic population. And you know what else they're destroying? And for you, it means a little bit less, but it means quite a bit in this state. They're killing unions. They're killing unions because the unions are not able to survive. They're not able to survive this on.
Harry, I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm sort of a zombie movie freak. I've actually seen like every zombie movie and every episode of every zombie show. I'm obviously working through some kind of trauma. But if you've ever watched if you ever watched a zombie movie, they turn. They turn. Okay. And when they turn, they're not human anymore. And you have to kill them. You have to kill them. You have to kill them. Because otherwise they're going to kill you, because they're destroying our families. They're decimating the blacks. They're decimating the unions. Okay. And so even if it's your wife or your daughter, once she's a zombie, you got to shoot her in the head. Okay, that's the way it works. So I don't know if he's speaking about turns in that sense or turns like they've turned over to the other side. But the point is, once they've turned, and they're turning at rates we've never seen before, they are the enemy. Okay, and so I just want people to understand this is the way Hitler talked about the Jews. Hitler didn't run for office saying, I'm going to kill all the Jews. He ran for office saying the Jews are vermin who are taking over our country, destroying our country. They're turning evil. So it's the same rhetoric, and from someone who has the same intention, someone who would go full Hitler if he could. And just to support that, do you want to say something, Harry, before I go to the next thing?
Only to say that we're seeing the same thing with Modi in India, who's treating Muslims and having bulldozers bulldozing their neighborhoods and demonizing them to make it a Hindi country of, it's bigger than China, several billion. So this is happening around the world. This is coming back.
Right, it's coming back. So I just want to quickly take you through Trump's 2025 plan in case you missed it. We're going to quickly go through it so you really see the scope of it. Chip, can we have that first? So I'm not going to read the fine print. I'm just going to read the headlines here. Number 1, carry out mass deportations. Number 2, increase the number of agents for ICE raids. Number 3, build camps to detain immigrants. Number 4, push for other countries to take would-be asylum seekers from the United States. And number 5, once again, ban entry into the United States from certain Muslim majority nations. Okay, so that's the genocidal piece. Now, can we go to the next slide? Okay, so we're going to jail the Biden family. We're going to have all of his political foes indicted for challenging him, and we're going to target journalists for prosecution. That last one really makes me wonder what the heck is going on with journalism today. What the hell is going on with journalism today? Hey guys, they're telling you if he wins, you're going to jail. Why are you writing these puff pieces about him? Do you want to go to jail? I don't understand it. And finally, let's look at the last thing. Revive the practice of impounding funds. In other words, the president, the Congress would no longer have the power of the purse. Trump could do whatever he wants with the money. The next one, strip employment protections from tens of thousands of longtime civil servants. So we've long had a non-political meritocracy with our civil service ever since the Grant administration, actually. He is going to eliminate that so that no one will have tenure, they won't have protections, and basically he's going to hollow out every aspect of the government from the inside. If you're not MAGA, if you're not a member of the party, you're going to go bye-bye, and you're going to be replaced by some incompetent who doesn't know how to do your job, but is loyal to Donald Trump. And look at the next one. Purge officials from the intelligence agencies, law enforcement, the State Department, and the Pentagon. They're purging everyone who isn't a member of the party. And 5, appoint lawyers who would bless this agenda, this illegal agenda, as lawful. So my basic point, though, is if you just look at that whole sweeping program, Harry, they're dismantling the Constitution amendment by amendment. They're burning it to the ground systematically.
Well, it's what a strong man does when he takes over. And really what's going on with the MAGA wing in Congress, in the House, is to disrupt and make Congress seem so incompetent and unsuccessful that the public will then welcome someone who would come in and take control. So it's coordinated effort, and it's very frightening. And it fits with Trump's psychology.
Exactly.
Which is to have people agree with him and admire him at all times.
And also fits with the psychology as a malignant narcissist. Remember, historically, the term malignant narcissism was introduced by Erich Fromm, who escaped the Nazis. And it was his attempt to explain the psychology of Hitler, specifically Hitler, to retrofit a personality disorder around Hitler, but also understanding that Hitler was of a type, that these strong men, as you call them, are a type. So really, that document is as much a psychological document as it is a political document, right? This is how a malignant narcissist thinks America should be run.
It's the intersection of psychology and politics.
It is. It truly is. Well, speaking about the intersection of psychology and politics, one of our esteemed colleagues, Dr. Phil, conducted an interview with Trump that was, well, just rather, how should I put it, ass-kissing?
Well, let me describe it to you. This is John and I sometimes divide Trump's activities, and I decided to take the Dr. Phil interview that was held. Actually, I think it was Mar-a-Lago. I think Dr. Phil went to see him, and I never really followed Dr. Phil. I know that Oprah kind of elevated him many years ago because he's kind of a no-nonsense. What's his famous tagline? How's that working for you?
Oh, yeah.
That was one of his lines. He kind of became America's psychologist, following in the august footsteps of Dr. Joyce Brothers. But I think what happened with Dr. Phil is he's become more and more of a very conservative pundit. And in fact, he ascribes to conspiracy theories that he tried to get Trump to endorse during the interview. But last week we were talking about Trump being on Fox and Friends Saturday with the B team, where we called it, and this comes from Nicole Wallace, who coined the term Earth 1 and Earth 2, Earth 2 being the place where Trump's reality is an accepted reality, all the lies. And there's so many lies watching Trump, it's getting to the point where I never hear anything true.
Yeah.
And I've heard the lies being recycled because he gums them together. His cognitive decline isn't just in individual sentences, it's also the ways in which he digresses, right? So Dr. Phil was just no hard questions about the conviction, no challenging him on any lies whatsoever. None. But Dr. Phil did try to get Trump to talk about his inner experience, because Dr. Phil has some vestiges of being a therapist. And he pushes it in a number of different ways. So I'll show you the first clip and then we'll talk about it. Now, notice that he didn't answer the question whatsoever. He very masterfully flipped it back on what you have to be smart. Now, I stopped the cut here because after another minute, he meanders back to Dr. Phil's question. Chip? You've got to give Dr. Phil points because he keeps coming back. And as John and I are both therapists, and people have resistance to talking about deeply personal things, and you have to stay on it. And Dr. Phil does. What's fascinating to me about this is, first of all, Trump admits that he watches Dr. Phil. Right? He says, people think it's stupid. I watch it. And, most people watch a show like Dr. Phil where he's pressing on people to expose who they really are, because it's very moving to watch someone suddenly realize that they've been abusive to their spouse, or they have an alcohol problem, or whatever it is that Dr. Phil is working with. And there's a kind of cathexis, it's an old term, but a release of feelings that people have when they watch it vicariously. But what Trump says is, I've watched you break people down, and you're not going to do it. You're not going to do that to me. And that's when I realized he doesn't watch the show to be moved by revelation. He watches the show to watch Dr. Phil break people down.
The suckers and losers.
Right. Because Trump gets pleasure out of watching people being humiliated.
That's an excellent
Whether
point.
He's doing it or other people are. So I thought it was a very, very revealing moment.
But also in another sense.
Thoughts, John? Go ahead.
But because connecting with someone on a human level. So you're right. Dr. Phil is really trying here, right, to connect with Trump on a human level. The only problem is he's not human.
Well,
he's trying to reach some inner core, right, where there is a soulless vacuum, but also coming across these characterological defenses, right? So he's saying, hey, I really want to hear your stories. I'm not going to fall for that one and look weak and cry. No way.
Well, and John, not to correct you or anything, but it's not that he's not human. It's that his narcissistic personality disorder is so severe that he cannot tolerate even a moment of vulnerability. He can't tolerate a moment of revealing something that's vulnerable, and he can barely feel it. And I think that's what Dr. Phil was trying to break through.
Well, the other thing Dr. Phil showed us is something that I've been saying for years. Donald Trump is untreatable.
Oh, for sure.
Malignant narcissism is untreatable. You know, if you wanted to curse your worst enemy in our profession, you would curse him with having Donald Trump as a patient. Could you imagine being stuck in that Dr. Phil interview week after week? So sounds like things are hard. Nothing's hard for me. It's hard for the suckers and losers.
Right? You're absolutely right, except that someone like that would never come.
Of course.
Right. So the way I thought you were going to say the worst thing to curse someone you don't like is to curse them with that personality disorder, because it's untreatable. Can we go on to the next one? We're almost, like fun. He doesn't want to say it. You just said it. Notice how he's forgotten where Orban is from a number of times already. He's called him he said he's from Turkey. And you could see him not being able to catch the country. And then suddenly, in a sentence later, he goes, Hungary. And he keeps going. By the way, I should have introduced that better. Dr. Phil was pushing Trump on whether Trump's family wants him to run again. And Dr. Phil was very smart to push on that because they haven't been showing up.
And as you've pointed out before, who is the expert that he's quoting? Viktor Orban, a dictator allied with Putin. Hello, press, calling the intelligence community.
It's incredible.
It's
incredible.
It's horrible.
This last segment, Dr. Phil 3 times tries to get Trump to say that he won't exact revenge on his enemies, saying it's got to stop. Your best revenge is to succeed. I really admire Dr. Phil and how he was trying to do this, even though he's on Earth 2 and is part of the problem. But he was trying to get Trump to acknowledge that there's a problem. This is the 3rd time, and Trump is evasive at the end. But it wasn't supposed to go that long.
I wondered about that.
That it was supposed to stop much earlier. I'm not sure why. I think the clip wasn't right. But in any case, what I wanted to point out there is that Dr. Phil really had a pretty good therapist's interpretation. He said, you don't have time to get even. You only have time to get it right. And Trump refused to say that he wouldn't exact revenge. And
actually, it's funny when he says, well, you're right, because revenge takes a long time.
Yeah, right. Best served
you don't have time for revenge. No, it's true. You really got to plan for revenge because it's a long-term project. so
untreatable. Untreatable.
Absolutely. That's one of the themes of today. Watching Dr. Phil is to realize that he is truly untreatable. And, even though Dr. Phil exists on Earth 2 and made that long, heartfelt plea for people to be inspired by Trump, we do have to offer him a certain amount of respect, right? Because he's a colleague, he's a fellow psychologist. Oh, wait, actually, he's a former psychologist. Because I don't know if people know this, but the term psychologist is a licensed term. You can have a PhD in psychology, but you can only be a psychologist if you're licensed as a psychologist. Well, in 2010, Dr. Phil stopped renewing his license. His explanation was, well, now that I'm a media figure, it's really not necessary. I'm not treating patients. But it seemed peculiar to me. I mean, after all, if you're a media psychologist, wouldn't you want to be able to say you're a psychologist? It seems like that would be worth the $150 a year it costs to renew your license. So I smelled a rat, and I thought there might be something more to do going on here. So we put our team of shrinking Trump interns to work doing research. And lo and behold, what did we discover? But there was an ethical complaint against Dr. Phil. I'm not going to read it here, but there you go. I just wanted you to see the legal document that shows the ethical complaint. It It isn't the worst complaint in the world. It alleges that he engaged in a dual relationship, that he engaged in a business relationship with a client. He hired a attractive 19-year-old girl who was his client to be his secretary. They didn't remove his license. I just want to be clear, because there were rumors that his license was stripped. He was not stripped of his license. He was reprimanded and put under the supervision of a psychologist for a year. But the next year but then he did not renew his license. But look, it's not like he was accused of sexually abusing the woman, right? Oh, wrong. Can we see the next monster Dr. Phil accused of molesting young patient? You can see the picture there of the young woman. I don't know why it was not in the complaint, her allegation of sexual abuse, but she did give an interview to the press saying that she had been abused. So I don't know what the story was there, but just to understand, okay, these people who support Trump are people who are completely without integrity. Oh, I forgot to tell the other little story, Dr. Phil. Before he became a psychologist, he ran a health club, and he sold all of these memberships to the health club, and then sold the memberships to a third party to monetize them. And then he closed the health club and fled town, sort of like the producers.
So
it was
you're
investigated by the Kansas Attorney General. So it was a serious, and it was never adjudicated. But it shows us the kind of people who support Trump. The people who support Trump, whether they're doctors, lawyers, politicians, they all have antisocial features. Okay, they all have that sort of criminal mindset where they don't mind taking
the Dr. Ronnie Jackson.
Exactly. Yeah, Dr. Phil is to psychology what Candyman Jackson is to medicine.
All right. Well, I would like to introduce, if we can, a real clinical psychologist practicing.
Wait, Harry, we didn't do good news yet. We didn't do Eugene Robinson.
Oh, goodness. Okay, let's go.
Okay. I know we bitch a lot on this show about all the bad news, but we do like to give credit and support to the people who do a good job of reporting on Donald Trump. Well, we played you that shark video, right, which didn't really seem to move the needle very much. But let's hear what Eugene Robinson of the Washington Post in his column had to say about that. The article is Donald Trump okay? His story about hypothetically being electrocuted is another glimpse into a mind that is unwell. Let's look at the next page. It is irresponsible. It's irresponsible to obsess over President Biden's tendency to mangle a couple of words in a speech, while Donald Trump is out there sounding detached from reality. Biden, who is old, at least makes sense. Trump, who is also old, rants like someone you'd cross the street to avoid. We in the media have failed by becoming inured to Trump's verbal incontinence. Not just the rapid-fire lies and revenge-seeking threats, but also the frightening glimpses into a mind that is evidently unwell. In 2016, Trump said outrageous things at his campaign rallies to be entertaining. In 2024, his tangents raise serious questions about his mental fitness. The White House press corps would be in wolf pack mode if Biden were in the middle of a speech and suddenly veered into gibberish about boats and sharks. There would be front page stories questioning whether the president at 81 was suffering from dementia, and the op-ed pages would be filled with thumbsuckers about whether Vice President Harris and the cabinet should invoke the 25th Amendment. House Republicans would already have scheduled hearings on Biden's mental condition and demanded he take a cognitive test.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Robinson, for pointing out the hypocrisy of the press, pointing out this double standard, and pointing out the way the press is gaslighting America by they're telling a double lie, by pathologizing Biden's normal signs of aging and normalizing Trump's blatant, flagrant signs of dementia. And this is just another example of it.
Agreed. And I was so pleased to see that article. And actually, I heard Eugene Robinson talk on Morning Joe about it, and they talked about his article. So at least some parts of the media are starting to really raise this as an issue, which
the White House press corps would be in wolf pack mode if Biden were in the middle of a speech and suddenly veered into gibberish about boats and sharks. There would be front page stories questioning whether the president at 81 was suffering from dementia, and the op-ed pages would be filled with thumbsuckers about whether Vice President Harris and the cabinet should invoke the 25th Amendment. House Republicans would already have scheduled hearings on Biden's mental condition and demanded he take a cognitive test.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Robinson, for pointing out the hypocrisy of the press, pointing out this double standard, and pointing out the way the press is gaslighting America by they're telling a double lie, by pathologizing Biden's normal signs of aging and normalizing Trump's blatant, flagrant signs of dementia. And this is just another example of it.
Agreed. And I was so pleased to see that article. And actually, I heard Eugene Robinson talk on Morning Joe about it, and they talked about his article. So at least some parts of the media are starting to really raise this as an issue, which is, they say in the old days when people were in psychotherapy, they were afraid of becoming too dependent on their therapist. And my line as a young therapist was always, it's my job to become obsolete. Well, I would love for our job, John, to be obsolete, but we're far from it.
That's right. Here's the shocking thing, folks. This sounds like some kind of crazy right-wing underground, podcast, but folks, if you want to know the truth, they're not going to tell you the truth of the mainstream media. You have to come here to our underground podcast. Well, we are the radio-free Europe of psychiatry. I'm sorry, we are, because this is the place where you can hear actual professionals discuss this material intelligently, objectively. It's very important.
And speaking of which, can I introduce our guest?
No, we have one more. Read the outline. So we weren't the only ones to notice Trump acting crazy with his shark talk. Actually, remember, I have predicted, and that may be a long-term prediction or a long shot, that Trump will find a way to back out of the debates because he can't debate. Okay, well,
not at night.
Yeah, not at night, right? Maybe if they had it at 11 in the morning with like an early bird special, maybe he could do it. But his ally is essentially signaling to him over the airwaves in Fox, because he listens to Hannity, don't debate. Can we hear this tape?
Now, there are some even saying, Mark, that Donald Trump might be wise to just pass on the first debate, wait till he's nominated, then debate him. What would you say to that?
What would you say to that?
I think it's a message. David Pakman actually made the argument that they asked Hannity to bring that up to help Trump get out of this debate. Meanwhile, CNN is pushing it really hard, and Biden has announced that he's going into debate prep as soon as he's back from the European summit. So they're putting pressure on him to show up. And it will be fascinating to see.
Now, Harry, do we have a guest today?
Yeah, I'm sorry, John. I'm just so pleased to have this guest today. I want to introduce John Scrovan. He's a clinical psychologist who practices in Ithaca, New York. I've known him for almost 30 years. And besides being extremely astute and thoughtful and effective as a clinician, I have to tell the audience that he's the only clinician I know who treated a patient some years ago who then wrote a memoir about her experience on medication and also in therapy.
Was it called Therapist Dearest?
No. It's a really good memoir.
It was published. Oh, good. I'm
published by a major house, and in that book is a chapter about her therapy with John. Oh, so he's the only therapist I know who has been immortalized
distinction
in print. So, John, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, guys. There's so much to say with everything that you've just talked about. I do have to say, if Donald Trump was not in power, I would feel really sad about a human being being in the world like this. And what if you know what this kind of narcissism is like, and how difficult it must be ultimately. So, when I think about the dementia as sort of a late onset, we could say this is a later onset. And as you guys have pointed out, you can go back several years, and you can hear him talking much differently. When we talk about the malignant narcissism, that's kind of an early onset. That's something about the mix of his temperament and his social emotional environment. And the core to a malignant narcissism, I think, is that it is a narcissistic disorder. And if we think about what is at the core of that, it has to do with shame. It's a way that you organize your experience around having been shamed. Now, we all experience a certain amount of shame, but that shame can happen in a compassionate environment where we're taught how to respond to moments that may be a legitimate form of shame. And we're taught how to bear that, how to grow from it, how to make meaning. But there's a lot of information about Trump's early life, a lot of it that he discloses. His Mary Trump has written about that. It sounds like it was a horrible emotional environment. And when you have a repeated kind of a shame, it can become a mortifying shame, where there is a type of some people will even call it a soul murder. And what happens when you are crushed, your spirit is crushed at such an early age? Well, you go on living, but you have this crushed sense of self. Well, this is where the solution to living a life, you mentioned about a zombie, John, and unfortunately, quite sadly, people who are traumatized in this way have to figure out how to go on living. And there's reason to believe from the stories that he was deeply shamed. He was, even as he was older, he was always seen as an outsider. I think one of his rages was that he was never accepted within the New York society. He was shunned at Club 54. And so, when you think about shame as a core element of a narcissistic organization, I think to really understand shame, it's useful to think about its opposite. And I used to think that the opposite of shame was pride. But Rich Shavitz, who is a psychiatrist who works with extremely traumatized people, and he's a quite brilliant clinician, pointed out that the opposite of shame is actually dignity. And what is dignity? Dignity is when you have an experience of your inherent and fundamental worth, and that value is independent of any kind of attribute about who you are as a person. I don't believe this was something that Donald Trump was afforded. He doesn't act in what we would call a dignified way at all. And why would that be? Well, if his dignity was crushed and there was this intense shame, that shame gets welded with the type of a rage. When you're traumatized, when your sense of self is traumatized like that, that rage often goes in one of two directions. One is a type of a self-loathing, and the other is a rage outward.
Exactly.
And he comes from a privileged place, and I think he was more than able to send that rage outward. And we see that all the time. And so he's set up in a world where he's made to feel subhuman when your dignity is crushed. And so you move to being superhuman. And that becomes the internal fantasy, being superhuman.
Yeah.
And you can, then you're essentially a malignant narcissist is a traumatized person who can traumatize everything they come in contact with, because they have to organize the world as either victims or perpetrators. And he feels at some deep level that he's a terrible victim.
Right.
And the only move is to continue to perpetrate. Right. In his mind, I'm sure he's said this one way or another, that there's winners and there's losers. And you just, if you're a winner, you can justify anything. I noted that Dr. Phil said, we all have a mask. I found that an interesting moment. It's like, sure, there's a type of a mask where we have different selves, we present them in different ways. And he was suggesting that when Trump goes home, he can be in touch with his vulnerability. I don't believe that's true. I believe behind that mask is an intense need to deny all vulnerability, project that vulnerability on everyone else, which creates both a paranoia, because if you see vulnerability in anyone else, you have to attack it. It's a classic bully move, right? Mm-hmm. And then if your own dignity has been crushed, then that's a clear shot for sociopathy, because you're either a winner or a loser, cannot bear being a loser. There's my start. I don't know how much time we have. I'm interested in what you guys might think about that framing.
No, John, I really like that, and it sort of reminds me of the phrase "do unto others before they do it to you." Right? Everything becomes this kind of, and I really appreciate what you're saying about the sort of soul crushing, and that the trauma is so early in development that the person might develop intellectually after this early trauma, but the sense of self has been so damaged by shame that in a way the person never develops emotionally, never develops into maturity, where things are balanced, where things are more complex.
Louis B. Mayer said, I don't get ulcers, I give them. And I think what you're saying is he's been traumatized, but his way of dealing with it is to become a traumatizer. The one who's soul murdered is becoming a soul murderer. And because he's projecting it all outward, and he needs to feel, as you're saying, grandiose to compensate for the feeling of shame and inferiority. And what's also so interesting is his followers want him to be grandiose. There's this idealization that his followers have. So all of these ridiculous memes that we see, of him in a World War II outfit, or him looking like Superman, or he was actually like selling these like NFTs that weren't even NFTs because he's a con man. So they were just images of him in all these like cartoonish poses. And yet the thing is that instead of making fun of him for that, that's really how his followers want to think of him. So there's kind of a deal, right? There's kind of a deal between Trump and his followers. I need to think of myself as a superhuman, and you need me, and you need to think of me as a superhuman. So there's kind of a folie à deux.
Well, that is interesting. I've been thinking about how do we understand MAGA life, and I don't have time to get into it, but Arlie Russell Hotchkiss has a book about strangers in their own land, I think it's called, where she spent 5 years in Tea Party country. And she talks about there's this empathy wall. And I think that a lot of the people who are Tea Party and the MAGA people feel like there's been an indignity. One of the things that she talks about is that people they're more willing to get things from the government. What they don't like is it feels like people have cut in line in front of them. And the liberals are entitling them to all of this, to cut in front. And so I think that there's a way in which people who are MAGA, and I don't want to think of them as a homogeneous group, because I'm sure there are different pathways to it. But I think a part of the appeal is that with the increased income disparity, there's a loss of dignity that people are feeling, and they can identify with him and project a sense of self into him, and use some of his narcissistic grandiosity to help feel better, because they're really, in many ways, hurting.
John, I really like that model. I want to ask you a question. So, Trump makes the joke that talking to Dr. Phil is like having a psychiatric session. But if Donald Trump did come to you for treatment, John, where would you start?
Boy. I think the problem is that you ultimately would want to get to the point where you could witness his soul murder. And that would take years because he has a commitment to not being vulnerable. To feel vulnerable is not just a bad day, it's a shattering of his self. And I think that, someone with that level of malignant narcissism may risk a psychosis, that they couldn't really hold it together if they really grasp the depth of the wounding. And I think it's because early on, he probably didn't have anyone who could witness and hold and contain his sense of shame, because they were probably the perpetrators of it.
Well, John, if anybody could stand to sit in a room, apparently you, with your empathy and your wisdom, would be it. But I think it would be a horrendous experience. I really thank you for coming. I think you were so articulate. You really did lay out the whole model in a very thoughtful way.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gartner.
All right. Well, I'm so glad we had Dr. Scrovan here today. It's just
Me too. Well, Harry, go ahead. Sorry. So what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say that I've known John for a long time, and his subtlety in talking about how people come to be disordered and how to suffer always has that combination of precision, nuance, and compassion.
I agree. He definitely had more compassion for Trump than I do, so we give him that.
Oh, I think most people do.
It'd be hard to have less. Well, we're starting to develop a relationship with our listeners, and so we're going to have a little section here where we kind of go over the mail from our viewers, and we got a very interesting comment from. You can put it on the screen from Woo Woo Girl. She said, I adore these doctors. I enjoy their banter. I gotta say that I enjoy Dr. Gartner a bit more because he is, all caps, louder and more the rambunctious of the two. Dr. Segal is the quiet, introspective one. John riots, Harry quiets. Excellent partnership. Well, I couldn't agree with Woo Woo Girl more and everything.
I also want to say that we really appreciate it. I'll tell you what, when you watch this podcast, you can we invite you to leave comments in our comment section, because we read them and we think about them, and we'll clip them for you from time to time on the show. But we want to set up what we call the Shrinking Trump Psych Interns, and we want to have a tip line for you. So if you've seen something in the news that you think would be of interest to us, we'd like you to use this special email address. There it is. It's the Psychology Intern Tip Line. And guess what? It's shrinkingtrump@gmail.com. Send us Trump tips, things you think we should discuss in the next show, and we'll do our best to get them on the air if we haven't already seen them ourselves.
All right. And Harry is the director of psychological training for Shrinking Trump. So he's the one who will be responsible for responding to you. So if you're not getting an adequate response, please talk to Harry. I tend to ignore these things. So actually, I'm terrible about responding to correspondence. So that's why you're lucky that Harry's in charge.
Well, my students complain about how often I answer their email, but I'll do my best.
Okay.
So what time is it now, John?
Well, I think it might be time for Shrink Wrap. What have we learned today?
What did we learn today? Well, I think we're starting to see the more of Earth 2, actually. We're starting to see the ways in which people, if they do get an hour to talk with Trump, and both Fox and Friends and Dr. Phil had an hour and a half, it's because the campaign is pretty clear that whoever is interviewing him accepts all of his myths about who he is, will challenge him on none of his lies, none of his crimes, none of anything. It's never a real interview. It's a fake interview.
You know what it's like? It's like improv. It's like improv. They always say yes, right? Yeah. So whatever says, the people are being electrocuted by the batteries and being eaten by sharks. I know.
Well, I know it's wonderful, but I think with Dr. Phil, which was interesting, and despite his somewhat checkered past, was Trump, I mean, Trump agreed to the interview and even said that he wasn't sure he was going to agree to the interview because he watched Dr. Phil and he knew that Dr. Phil breaks people down. And Dr. Phil pushed him a little bit on his family not showing up, on who he really is inside, although I think Dr. Scrovan really gave us the best explanation of Trump's inner world that I've ever read or heard about. And also at the end, pushed him on the issue of revenge. And we got to see
and got nowhere.
Got nowhere. So we're starting to understand that Trump generates a universe of people who then participate in interviews which affirm his worldview, affirm his inner narcissism, affirms his grandiosity and his rage and his revenge.
Right.
And as long as that's rolling along, he won't be touched and it won't be revealed. However, that piece by Eugene Robinson and the fact that Trump is not in court every day, but is now doing rallies every few days, is giving our country the chance to see how disturbed this man really is. And that's our job. And I just wanted to say before we say goodbye, our show drops every Friday at 3 p.m. Please tell your friends about us. If you search for Shrinking Trump, it will show up in any search engine.
All right. Well, until next week, we'll see you at Shrinking Trump this time next week.
Bye, folks.